What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, welcome to my channel and welcome back to another True Crime Sunday. Now today we're going to jump right into the video. We're going to be talking about the disappearance of Terrance Williams and Felipe Santos. Now both of these men disappeared from Naples, Florida. Both men were minorities and both of them were in their 20s. And also both of them were very similar in height. They were 5'7" and 5'8". So they weren't these big, tall men. And in addition to all of these similarities, the way that they disappeared is basically the same person done did it. So we're gonna start off by talking about Felipe. Felipe Santos was born in Mexico on January 1st, 1979. At the time of his disappearance, he was living in the US illegally with his brothers. The boys would leave for work from about 6 a.m. onwards so that they could send money back home to their family in Mexico. On the morning of October 1st, 2003, Felipe was involved in a minor accident. He was on his way to work and he was accompanied by his two brothers, and this was just a minor traffic incident in a intersection. The officer who arrived at the scene was Officer Calkins, and Felipe was charged with driving without a license and driving recklessly. He was then arrested and then taken into Officer Calkins' custody. Now the other person who was involved in the accident remembers that Officer Calkins was continuously getting more and more agitated and continuously making comments about Felipe's lack of documentation. And then that afternoon, Felipe's boss would call up the police station to post bail for Felipe. And to his surprise, the person on the other line said that there was no record of any sort of arrest and Felipe wasn't there. He hadn't been arrested. And to this day, Felipe Santos has never been heard from or seen again. 2 weeks after Felipe disappeared, his family filed a missing persons report and then a separate official complaint against Officer Calkins, who had arrested him. Officer Calkins then submitted his own incident report and said that he did arrest Felipe, but that he had changed his mind. He said that he unofficially arrested Felipe, but didn't officially arrest Felipe in terms of writing in an incident report, calling it in, or booking Felipe, because Felipe was so polite. Officer Calkins then says that because he changed his mind, he dropped Felipe off at a Circle K. So this officer is saying, like, I did a favor by letting him go, but instead of driving Felipe back to work or to his house or taking him to the station or anything like that, or even back to the scene, he drops him off at a random Circle K. And even though the other person involved in the traffic accident said, like, they didn't believe that Officer Calkins just changed his mind, because at the scene, Calkins was growing more and more agitated. He was aggressive and constantly talking about how Felipe didn't have documentation. So even though that witness had said that, Officer Calkins was cleared of any wrongdoing. And then 2.5 months after Felipe goes missing, on January 12th, 2004, Terrance Williams would go missing. So Terrance was originally from Tennessee and he was a father of 4. He had recently moved to Naples, Florida to be closer to his mother, Marcia. And the night that Terrance went missing was actually the night that he was supposed to be going over to a co-worker's house for like evening drink. He did go to the evening drinks, but he was driving on a suspended license. And on top of that, his rego was expired. Now this was only supposed to be evening drinks with co-workers. So when he didn't come home, his housemate Jason Gonzalez got worried and he ended up contacting his mother Marcia to be like, hey, Terrance didn't come home last night and I'm worried. So his mother Marcia filed a missing persons report, and shortly after that his Cadillac was found at a local cemetery by his aunt. She didn't just stumble upon his car. His car had actually been impounded for being a traffic obstruction. But because his car was found at a local cemetery, his aunt was like, okay, why was it there? So what she did was she called the cemetery and she was like, hey, so my nephew's car was found at your cemetery and I'm just wondering if you had seen him or heard anything from that night. In fact, 2 witnesses who work at the cemetery witnessed what happened. And just so you know who I'm talking about, I will let you know that the towing company, or at least the towing document from that night of who called in the towing request to dispatch was Officer Calkins. His signature was on the paperwork and it was him who called it in to dispatch. When Terrance's aunt had found out that his car had been towed from the cemetery for being an obstruction and that there was a police officer signing off on it, that's when they called the police who were dealing with the missing persons report, and they were like, apparently he's been arrested. But when they called the police were like, no, there's no record of any sort of arrest here. He's not been booked here. We do have records of the towing of his car, but he was never arrested. So now let's talk about what the workers at the cemetery had said. The workers said that the night that Terrance went missing, they witnessed a police officer pulling him over into the cemetery parking lot. They said that they saw the officer pat him down and then arrest him and then take him into his car. He drove away, and then 15 minutes to an hour later, he came back, as in the police officer came back, but without Terrance. They said they then witnessed the officer picking up Terrance's keys, getting into Terrance's car, and driving it to the road just outside the parking lot and parking it so it was obstructing traffic. So now this family has a witness statement from 2 workers who were working at the cemetery who said that Officer Calkins had arrested Terrance. There's nothing in the system. He was never arrested. There's no official booking of Terrance. There's nothing. So Officer Calkins was confronted about this, and at this point it was like the beginning of an investigation, because this is now the second person who has gone missing after Officer Calkins has arrested them. At this point, Officer Calkins is being questioned, and he's saying, I have no recollection, I didn't do anything on that night. And he actually states that he did not arrest anybody on the night that Terrance went missing. He claims, I never arrested anyone, and I also never called in for anything to be towed. He's just lying, obviously, because there is record of him, and there's also a recording of him calling it into dispatch. But Officer Calkins could not just deny any longer. So a couple of days after, he was like, actually, I do have recollection of that night, and here's what happened. So he wrote his own incident report. So in Officer Calkins' version of the night that Terrance went missing, he wrote that he pulled Terrance over shortly after midnight because he was driving in distress. He claims that when he pulled Terrance over, that Terrance requested to be driven to a local Circle K because he had to work there. Terrance didn't work at a Circle K. And remember that Felipe went missing when Officer Calkins apparently dropped him off at a Circle K. In Officer Calkins' incident report, he says that he obliged Terrance. He said that, yeah, I drove him to the local Circle K, I dropped him off. And when he dropped him off, supposedly, allegedly, Terrance said, oh, the documentation, like the rego and all that kind of stuff, is in the car if you want to go back and see. So apparently, in his version, Terrance gives this police officer his keys so that he can go back and have a look at the documentation. Apparently that's what he had done. When he got there, there was no documentation in the car. And this is when Officer Calkins claims that he ran the plates. And when he ran the plates, it came up that they weren't registered, or at least the rego had expired. And this is when Officer Calkins claims that he used his his police issued cell phone to call the local Circle K and ask them, hey, I just dropped off Terrance, I'd like to speak to him, thank you. And apparently the employees were like, there's no Terrance that works here. So now he's claiming that he feels deceived. He said he never moved Terrance's car. He said that it was obstructing traffic, and that's when he called it in to be towed. So this is Officer Calkins' version of events. Because he's being investigated, his claims need to be investigated. So they went to the local Circle K. They interviewed all of the employees that were working that night. They obtained the security footage, and they also obtained Officer Calkins' work-issued call log. The people who were working at the local Circle K claimed that no one ever called looking for someone who didn't work there. That never happened. In the security footage, they saw no sign of either Terrance or Officer Calkins in the parking lot or in any of the security footage. There was no sign of them together or separately. They were never there. And then in his call logs, there was no record of any Circle K phone call from his work issued cell phone. And remember when I said that the call was recorded, like all dispatch calls are recorded. When Officer Calkins calls dispatch and he's trying to get Terrance's car towed, the recording has Officer Calkins saying some inappropriate things about Terrance in terms of his race, in terms of like the car that he was driving. And at one point, like, one of the comments was like, you know, or like, it's fitting he's driving a homey Cadillac. Well, but another interesting thing about this dispatch call is that on the call he does actually say that he moved the car. When he was presented with the recording of the dispatch call, he says that the racially inappropriate stereotype jokes that I was making were just jokes with a friend, like the dispatch person is your friend. But he just said, oh, they were just jokes with a friend. And then when he was presented with the part where he said he did move the car, he was like, oh, that's right, I did move the car, but it was only to make it easier for the towers to come and collect it. So Officer Calkins is just, he's denying, like, I didn't move it to stage the scene, I didn't move it to get rid of any evidence, I moved it to be a nice guy so that the towing truck people can get it easily and get it out of traffic. Officer Calkins is still having no memory of anything about Terrance. He says, I don't even know his last name. And he's saying these things and he's just getting himself into like more holes. Like, just say you know his last, just say you know, you arrested him. Like, what do you mean? 20 minutes after he calls in for dispatch to tow this car, he also calls in a background check using Terrance Williams's full name and using a birth date that Terrance was known for using, which wasn't his real birth date, it was a fake birth date, but he always used a specific birthday when he was pulled over by the police. Officer Calkins is now using Terrance Williams' full name for a background check and this fake birth date that only, it's a very specific birth date that only Terrance, you know, it's not his real one. You know what I'm saying? So Officer Calkins is looking pretty suspicious right now. FDLE and the FBI were like, okay, we're gonna look into this. They put a GPS tracking device on his patrol cruiser, on his police cruiser. In all of the spots that his patrol cruiser spent the most time at is where they brought cadaver dogs. But they didn't find anything. So there was a lack of evidence. That means that there were no charges, and still to this day have been no charges ever brought against Officer Calkins. But he was fired because he is involved in 2 missing persons cases that are basically identical and just months apart. But he was only really brought up on the second one, because realistically he got away with the first one pretty easily. So the main theory on this case is that Officer Calkins, yes, did arrest them, but the main theory for this is not what you are thinking. The main theory on this case is that Officer Calkins actually took both of them on a Starlight tour. Now, if you don't know what a Starlight tour is, apparently it originated in Canada. And this is when police officers would take minorities, so any non-white people, and it started out with police officers taking Canadian Aboriginals on a Starlight tour. That's when you pick them up and you drive them to city limits or into absolute nowhere and you tell them to get out and you basically abandon them there and then you let the elements take them. So the theory is that Officer Calkins was targeting minorities, especially people who didn't have documentation. He would arrest them and then take them on a Starlight tour. Now, a lot of people are found, but it's too late. Once they've been taken on a Starlight tour, it's too late once they've been found, especially in Canada, because a lot of people were found frozen. And it's believed that Officer Calkins took both Terrance and Felipe to the nearby Everglades. Calkins has continuously refused to stand before a grand jury and has since moved to Iowa. And a big point that was made in this particular case is that when somebody goes missing, they're usually this white person with blue eyes and they're placed all over the news and it's this huge thing. But no one has heard from or seen Terrance or Felipe for the last 14 years. The last time they were seen was being arrested by Officer Calkins. And Officer Calkins claims that he dropped both men off at the local Circle K. What does this man have with Circle K? And I'm just wondering, oftentimes minorities, especially people who don't have documentation, how many people are here sending money back to their family? You know what I'm saying? How many people are here trying to support a family who are here illegally? How many people have families like that who can't just come out to the media and be like, we need help, without drawing more attention to their situation? So how many other people have been unofficially arrested by Calkins? What do you guys think actually happened to Felipe and Terrance on the nights that they were arrested by Officer Calkins? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I do believe that the Starlight tour thing is, like, I believe in that theory. And whatever happened after that is still, I do still believe that it is just as bad as doing it yourself. I think that, I don't understand how someone cannot testify in front of a grand jury. I thought that you could like force them to, but apparently not, because he's living it up in Iowa. Anyways, you guys, let me know your thoughts down below. If you like these videos, listen, if you like these videos, give it a thumbs up. That does help. But also, if you like my vibe, please subscribe. I do videos like this every single Sunday. I do true crime videos every Sunday, and then I put out a video in the week. I'll put up videos on how to edit photos, what to do with your Instagram. I do mukbangs, I do scary stories, I do a lot of story times. While we're on the note of story times, I know you guys really enjoyed my story time on dating Hectic Huss. It was like a 3-part series and telling my heartbreak. I bore my heart out on the internet, but you guys said that you like my storytelling skills, and because of that, I have decided to start telling other people's stories as well as my own stories. I'm still gonna tell you stuff that happens in my life, but I love telling you guys stories, and I feel like you guys like that too. So if you have a story, whether it's on like a time you got cheated on, or whether it's this elaborate story about something paranormal, or whether it is like anything, any kind of story that you think is interesting that maybe you don't want to go on YouTube and tell, but you want me to tell, send me an email. I'll put the email down below, submitstorytimes@gmail.com I think it is, but the actual email is going to be in the description box below. Send me an email with your story. Don't leave out any details, and I might just tell your story in a video on YouTube. I'll keep everything anonymous. I'll change the names. Don't worry about that. Nobody's going to clock you. If you like my vibe, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.